Welcome to the second batch of OWS education by the Open Web Sandbox. My name is Jacopo and I'm part of the Open Web Sandbox team. This month's edition is on blockchain basics and this first video will be on Web3. So let's dive in. To understand what Web3 is, it's better to look at the evolution of the internet since its inception. To do this, we must go back to Web 1 and then Web 2 and finally Web 3. So the first version of the internet in the 1990s is talked about as the read-only version. This initial Web 1 version was comprised of simple homepages and hyperlinks, giving users the ability to surf pages of content using these links. This was as close to a digital version of magazines as possible, where there was very limited functionality given to the users, and the barrier to entry to be able to write content was similar to that of traditional publishing. From the user's perspective, reading content was the main purpose of the internet at the time. The second version of the internet in the following decade is talked about as the read-write version. Web 2 gave users the ability not only to view content, but also to produce, edit, and publish it on the internet. This reduced the barriers to entry for what was allowed to be published, and it saw the development of all of the applications and websites we know of today, from internet forums, blogs, marketplaces, and finally, social media sites. What is important to consider for Web 2 is, where is the content that people produce stored, who is it stored by, and who owns it? The answers to these questions raise concerns about Web 2. So let's go through them. Where is data computed and stored for Web 2? Users create the content, whether it's actions, text, images, edits, or data. The software then processes this content running on virtual machines, storing the data in databases which run on servers. This is an example of how data is stored in a centralized manner. So who stores and controls the data? For the most part, private companies are the custodians of data, virtual machines, and their corresponding databases. Private companies are also the custodians of the server hardware that runs the software, virtual machines, and databases. Who owns the data? Well, depending on the privacy policy, private companies at some level own the data or metadata that is stored in their databases. Due to this, the companies are then able to sell this data to other companies within their legal bounds. Okay, let's move on to Web 3. The third version of the internet, which began at the end of the 2010s, is referred to as the read-write-own version. Web 3 allows users not only to produce content, but also own the content on the internet without any dependence on private companies. This aims to reduce the risk associated with centralizing data. Web 3 has been the development of software like cryptocurrencies, blockchain, and peer-to-peer systems. What is important for Web 3 is, how can we solve the current centralization issues with computation, data storage, and data ownership? Well, let's go through them again. Where is data computed and stored for Web 3? Users create the content that goes into dApps and their smart contracts, whether it's actions, text, images, transactions, or data. The smart contracts then that process this content run on decentralized virtual machines. Decentralized virtual machines store all of their data on decentralized blockchain databases. This is an example of how Web 3 stores data in a decentralized manner. Who stores and controls this data? Well, unlike Web 2, the role of dApps is to autonomously store data on blockchains, which are not controlled by any entity. This is an example of how Web 3 data is controlled in a decentralized manner. And who owns the data? Well, the data is transparently stored on blockchains, but its content is owned by the users. Users can become participant shareholders of Web3 dApps or DAOs, or own content on these platforms. Owning cryptocurrencies, tokens, or NFTs is how users can become owners of data, giving them the right to ownership. In this video, we gave a brief comparison of Web 1, 2, and 3. Now we understand what Web 3 is and why it's important for the development of the internet. To look into blockchain technology as an instance of Web 3, we must first see what problems blockchain technology faces so that we can later see how it's doing in trying to solve these problems. The next video will give a brief introduction to the blockchain trilemma. Thank you.